Good morning. It's Dr. Larry Straub and week 5, and I'm doing chapter 10 on corporate level strategy, related and unrelated diversification. A few areas that I want to talk about today are, well, first is different ways that companies can enter new industries. Last week, we highlighted a specific area, strategic alliances, where companies can form alliances. From a lot of times you'll see this from a global perspective, but you could honestly, you could actually do that same thing to enter new industries as well. So joint venturing would be a form of that. Forming a joint venture with another company that's in another industry that you would want to be involved with. Acquisitions, as we talked about, and even maybe mergers would be ways to also enter new industries. And the third way, and the most difficult way, is to enter enter an industry from scratch, either as a new business or as a new division within a business. Now, this is obviously the most difficult way to do it. You're literally starting from ground zero, and you've got to build up the infrastructure, and you've got to build up basically everything it takes to be in that industry. Now, it can be helpful if you've already got an ongoing business and you're getting into that industry. It can definitely help because you've got a lot of the infrastructure already in place. You've got the technology, maybe have the marketing expertise, you may have a lot of management expertise that it takes, and you may have some of the supply chains, even manufacturing structure in place. If you look at some of the companies in our Spirit Aerosystems cohort as an example of this, they entered a new industry at the bequest of the president and the government and getting into ventilators. I don't think they'd ever been in an industry like that. So they kind of started that from scratch like a lot of others did, but they leveraged their existing competencies, their existing core competencies, their manufacturing footprint, their manufacturing expertise, their logistics expertise, any number of things like that, that definitely greased the skids and gave them a little bit more of a downhill slant to getting into that industry. So those are a few of the different ways that you can get into new industries. Generally, there's the old saying, shoemaker, stick to your last, which means you tend to stay where you are. You tend to stay where you're comfortable, what you know. And so it's kind of unusual to see significant changes in industry from businesses, but it's certainly not unheard of. Many times it can be forced. We got in our company once upon a time, we were in the oil business. And as the oil business became much, much tougher, and we just felt like it was imperative for us to look at new avenues. So we actually got into the farm equipment industry from the oil industry. In some ways, especially at the time, it seemed almost like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, but it ended up being a good long-term move and a long-term strategy for us. But it definitely came with challenges. You had a steep learning curve. You had a lot to get up to speed on fairly short order. So it was a bit of a challenge to say the least. The second area that I wanted to talk about in chapter 10 is restructuring companies. Most businesses will wind up needing to restructure, particularly as our economies and our environments get more convulsive. It's almost inevitable that at some time a company is going to need to restructure. And unfortunately, many of those companies will be unsuccessful. Much like getting into a different industry or whatever, doing major restructuring of a company is extremely complicated. It can be. And I'm not talking about moving the furniture around within a room. I'm talking about having to really majorly restructure your business. Um, Give you a couple examples with our company. We had to do this. We were in the ag equipment industry, we were in the oil industry before that, so we had pretty convulsive environments. And so we had to restructure our business a few different times, at least a few that I can think of. And one was when we went from, in the agricultural equipment industry, when we went from being a one store operation to being multi-stores. We peaked out at a high of 7 stores, and we came back to 5 stores eventually. But as we went up that ladder and we bought and we acquired more stores and more organizations, that involved restructuring our organization. Every time we did that, we had to restructure in a way. We had to restructure our corporate apparatus to be able to keep track and keep up with it all. We had to restructure the way we did things as we had more stores. There were things that worked for us when we were one store operation that did not work for us very well when we were a 3 to 5 store operation. And so we really had to change the way we did things, and we did so. Another time that we had to restructure our organization was about 7 years ago, when our agricultural industry in general and the agricultural equipment industry came along for that same ride. Is things went really crazy over the span of about 5 to 7 years, and we had to literally more than double the size of our organization. The amount of sales that we did, we went from being a $40 to $45 million a year company to being a $65 million company to being a $75 and $80 million company to being a $90 to $100 million company. And then we eventually peaked out at around $115 million. And that happened over about a 5-year period of time. And it was an incredibly explosive growth rate. We went from probably about 80 employees to probably 135 employees. And some of that, there was one acquisition in there, but the most of it was generic growth. And so we had to massively restructure our organization through that period. And then the last 3 years of our existence before we sold our company, we had to restructure as that peak that we went up came down the other side. And it was quite a ride. And so we went from being $115 million in revenues to about $57 million in revenues in a span of about 3 to 4 years' time. So that was quite a roller coaster to ride, from going from $45 million in sales to $115 million in sales, and then over about a 5 to 7 year period, and then back down to a $57 million company in the span of about 3 years. And for a very capital intensive business, a lot of leverage, a lot of debt that you deal with, just by the nature of the business, that was quite a ride. And so the industry changed dramatically through those gyrations. When we were at our peak and we were at 7 stores and we had over $100 million in revenues, it looked like we were positioned to be one of the, we were one of the top, probably 3%, 5%, 3 to 5% of dealership groups in North America. And we looked like we were positioned for the long haul, and we were going to continue to acquire more stores, things like that. Well, when the thing came back down on the other side, it really changed the deck of the entire industry. And within the span of about 3-4 years tops, we suddenly found ourselves on the outside looking in. And so we spotted that, and that's when we decided to sell our business. And the company worked with us to sell our business to a company that had an additional generation. They were older than us. They had They were better capitalized, and so we knew that they were much better positioned to ride the gyrations that would be coming, that we knew would probably be coming. And turns out we were very right in terms of the convulsive landscape was going to continue on. So the new company that bought our business is much better positioned to be able to ride that wave, ride the ups and downs that come with it. So one of the things that, the third thing that I wanted to talk about today is, while there are many advantages to diversification, even globalization, each type of these businesses are complicated. And one of the things, somebody had written one of their papers last week, and it made me think about, and I think they specifically might have mentioned Apple and their skill sets. And Apple is a heck of a company, obviously, and they do a lot of things incredibly well. But one of the things that I want to talk about and forewarn everybody a little bit is we tend to have this cult of personality, and we have fallen into the trap at times of kind of worshiping at the trough of the celebrity CEO. Business press, regular news press, really make CEOs out to be these rock stars at times. And they sometimes buy into their own press clippings, and people think that this person can go anywhere they want, any type of industry they want, any type of business they want, and they can transfer those skills and be able to do just as well somewhere else. And I've never bought into that. I know our business and the ag equipment business, I was the CEO of that for close to 25 years. And I will tell you that after 10 years, even close to 20 years, I was still learning and figuring out where all the levers were and where all the bells and whistles and the way everything fit and worked together. Industries can be incredibly complicated. And just because you're a rock star CEO in one type of business and industry doesn't mean those skills are going to transfer into another. Just because you can run a clothing retail operation doesn't mean you're going to be able to run a Spirit Aerosystems type operation, or vice versa. Those flows both ways. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. J.C. Penney's, we're all familiar with them. They've been having challenges for years. They bought into this cult of personality and this savior celebrity CEO mentality, and they brought over a CEO from, he was the senior VP of retail operations from Apple. His name was Ron Johnson, and he was a rock star at Apple. He did incredible things, and he actually started the Apple retail organization and operations. And so he was very well known. He was very famous because of all of that. He was celebrated because of all of that. But J.C. Penney's bought into that, and they thought, hey, if this guy can do that for Apple, maybe he can come and rejuvenate our retail operations. And I don't know that I would call it a complete disaster. I think the guy did some really incredible things that you see to this day at JCPenney's. When you walk into their stores, they look different, they're structured differently, and he did a lot of incredible things in terms of taking them to the next level in terms of their in-store marketing, probably even their online presence, things like that. But he also made some huge mistakes that I think Penney's paid for significantly, and maybe still even pay for to a certain extent. One of the things that they didn't take into account, he didn't take into account as a CEO, is that clothes and retail are a commodity with very little differentiation, and you're dealing with traditionally low margins. Apple, on the other hand, specifically their products, were quite different from commodities of retail and clothing. There was a lot of differentiation with Apple products. They were very high margin. So the point is, what worked for Apple did not come close to flying at J.C. Penney's. I don't know if you remember the retail strategy that the guy rolled out. It was basically everyday low pricing. And they did away with their discounts. They did away with their promotions, or at least most of them. And Penny's was known for that. And he felt like their customer base were overly addicted, and they had attracted the wrong customer base because of that. And so he was going to move it in the direction of, we're going to command the landscape, and we're going to command the prices that we feel like our products are worth, and we're just going to have them everyday priced, and we're not going to play these gimmicky games with retail promotions and discounts. Well, again, it did not come close to working at Penny's as it did at Apple. They were two different animals, and he really brought the company perilously close to bankruptcy at that time. I know they've since had to file it with the COVID issues, but at that time they were very, very close to having to file bankruptcy because of the strategies that he had brought in with him. And I don't think he lasted over maybe a couple, 3 years. And they ended up having to buy his contract out and move him on down the road. And they moved back to, I think, somebody who was a previous CEO of the company that was still on their board. And they moved back to their traditional retail strategy that had served them relatively well through the years. Again, Penny's had major problems with or without this guy. They tried something radically different. It didn't work. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Who knows? But this gentleman did not necessarily pan out the best. So, okay, well, that are the 3 things that I wanted to talk about on Chapter 10. Look forward to reading your papers and discussion boards for this week. Don't hesitate. I've had some of you reach out when you needed something or had some questions, so don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. So, all right, well, thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.